Hello, everybody. Here I am with my coffee, and I'm joined, as usual, by my good buddy over in the UK, Reverend David William Parry, and we're here in our continuing exploration of what is truth. And as Jesus Christ showed us, it's sometimes best to keep one's mouth closed, but being as that we're the talkative kind, we'll attempt to broach that and try and explore it, knowing that we're not going to get to the end, which is, I guess, the point of the whole thing, is that truth without end. What does that mean? And today I thought that we might come to understand some of the, there's been this kind of disconnect between Reverend David and myself over the last few weeks, which is entirely to be expected, because the modalities that I use in what you might call apocalyptic thinking escapes the purview of the abstract mind to a sufficient degree so that they usually just walk away and assume I'm crazy. Well, I'm not going to argue that point. I may very well be crazy, but I like to think I'm a nice guy, and so that's livable. Personally, I think that I'm merely a court jester, and I'm attempting to try and share some pearls in a way that is to be held harmless, and I really only have the best of wishes for anybody, and especially for those that are deep in their sleep of what's going around the world at this time, and I feel for their oblivion. And that being said, if you want to try and resolve something that's already been done, I would get to work on it, because it's going to be a challenge to overcome. But as for myself, the blood is sacred, as you know, those of you that have been here all along. But I'm going to try and build a bridge to David in a most peculiar way, because it will probably be through a path that he might take umbrage. And because I'm going to call him a Manichaean. And of course, his basic understanding of Manichaeism is probably from St. Augustine, who was emboldened to say that I believe in Christianity because the church says so. And so that's really, as you know, those of you that have been here a while know that that's not my approach. My approach is more of the Goethean, Faustian approach, is that I'm hoping to be able to unfold sufficient inner understanding so that I may do the right thing. And that is the essence of Manichaeism, is overcoming evil through mildness. Because within the mythos of Mane is this whole idea that evil is co-eternal with the good. And the challenge becomes, how does one understand the nature of evil? And I have yet to find anybody that can clarify it more succinctly than Rudolf Steiner, as usual. And so I'm going to try and share some fundamentals that, probably given some thought, you might think that it comes close to where you feel comfortable. And so I'm not here necessarily to make you feel comfortable, but I'm here to pose a challenge. And within the Manichaean stream are various movements, specifically in the 12th century and around there, of the Bogomil and the Valdensians and the Knights Templar and the Cathars of southern France that were mercilessly executed for their heresy. And their heresy was that they were to receive inner promptings regarding the intentions of the divine spiritual beings rather than external authority. And it's kind of like what we're going through right now, except that it's under the guise of science. And that being said, remember, they revise that book every year. And so, as Rudolf Steiner says, in a couple hundred years, they'll look upon the thinking of contemporary 20th and 21st century science. They'll look upon it in the same way that we look back on the myths of ancient cultures. Most people look upon it perhaps as an interesting curio. But that being said, that's okay. The real challenge is to come to an understanding of evil so that one can find a place in the world and be able to stand before this and be able to try and antidote it through the Christ principle. And that's that principle of equilibrium. And Rudolf Steiner makes the point. He says that evil is goodness that's out of time. He says, for example, we're the beings of old moon evolution, that existence that preceded Earth, planet Earth. Our existence there in this astral realm, composed of astral, etheric, and proto-physical warmth, that we're the beings that were active in that realm, act in the same way in our world, it would be evil. That evil is goodness at the wrong time or in the wrong place. It's like my friend David Spangler from Finhorn would say, misplaced concreteness. You know, it's like there's so many examples. The one I usually give is, you know, that water is a good thing, except if you're sitting at the bottom of a lake and you don't have an aqualung. You know, then it can be a difficult thing. So you have to keep in mind that it's all a matter of ordering, and you're the one that's in charge of ordering it, rather than this reliance on external authority to be able to order it for you, because we know that, as far as can be told, as far as our own well-being, it appears as though those that are in charge of order have abandoned ship. So you're seeing things that you can only shrug in disbelief going on in the world today, geopolitically, religiously, in education. There's so many levels of, I don't even want to get into explaining it, because they don't allow you to have opinions about that, because they're busy lying, and you're just supposed to sit back and take it. And so that kind of rubs me the wrong way, because that comes right up against the central topic of our show. What is truth? Well, it's definitely not the news that's being broadcast out today through so many outlets. But fortunately, there's a democratization, so to speak, of information that's been made accessible by the internet, even though it's being pushed down quite a bit by the corporate interests. Nonetheless, they can't shut it down, because their whole system is codependent. They're as addicted, if not more, to the internet than you and I. And so this is the battlefield right now, is to be able to come to an understanding in the midst of the battleground, in this dilemma that's going on, and that's going to intensify as we move into the winter. and there will be unfortunate things that happen, and I'm not saying I have answers for it. What I'm saying is that there will be those that have the intestinal fortitude and the strength of conviction to be able to weather the storm and come out on the other end to continue this unfoldment of what we might call universal humanity. Reverend David, how are you?
Struggling in a Premier Inn plus hotel room with connections I'm not sure how to use. Apart from that, I'm fine, thank you. I hadn't noticed a disconnect because I always work under the premise that all intellectuals don't agree on everything. So that doesn't necessarily mean there's a disconnect. Regarding, I also tend to think the mind, it's meant to work in abstractions. I mean, that's really what it's there to do. It mustn't remain in abstractions. That's dangerous, but it sort of is meant to abstract. Regarding the church, I'm hardly the most browbeaten, obedient son of the church, so I'm probably the worst person to say that to. They just wish I'd sod off, and I'm not going to. So, gosh, where do I go with Manichaeism? Yeah, I mean, no, I obviously I read Augustine's Confessions. What a very complex man. I take nothing at face value when I was reading. I haven't read any of his for years, any of his work for years. Saint Augustine, particularly the Confessions, because there are certain sections that read to me as very clearly perennial philosophy. And that was a man of supreme abilities. If he didn't mean that, he would have said it a different way. And one of his criticisms of Manichaeanism, as far as I remember, because it was a long time back, and it was said indirectly, which I thought was interesting, was that it wasn't actually perennialism. And that's extremely interesting. So what does he mean by Catholic? No, I mean, I've read some of the works of Mani. I love basically what Dennis Wheatley had to say about Manichaeanism. I take it as some sort of weird Hegelian dialectic that's somehow inbuilt into us. I can't make sense of that. Perhaps it's cultural, perhaps it's something else, perhaps it's all of it. Yes, no, right, wrong, good, bad, light, dark. I just think that's probably the way the human mind works. Maybe not the human spirit, but the human mind. So yeah, I mean, I've been called a mannequin. Mind you, I've been called lots of things by a great many people. And so am I sympathetic to Manichaeism? Yes. I mean, I'd love to go to the last open Manichaean temple in North China, Tien something. And the guy intrigues me, particularly because I suspect I follow Elaine Pagels. Pagels. If you'd asked Mani or any of the Manichaeans back in the day, what were they? They'd have said Christians. They wouldn't have said Manichaeans. They wouldn't have said Gnostics. I think my sympathies toward Gnosticism are well and truly attested, so I don't think I need to defend that. And yeah, I mean, poor old church. I mean, there's so much wrong with the church. It's untrue. But, rather like St. Francis, I've never wanted to throw out the baby with the bathwater. And just because something is claimed to be said in authority doesn't mean it's wrong. Just because the church says it, it doesn't mean it's wrong. At the very least, there's the pretext of church councils, most of which have been bought off or physically threatened, I admit. But, they have occurred, and there was a great deal of debate. Their problem was confusing historical truth with eternal truth. They seem to have made that very simplistic mistake a rather great many times, so I don't know what to say to that. And yeah, I suppose my last potato of defence is I tend to be in many ways quite sort of a mainstream Christian. I bet that comes as a shock to everybody. Yeah, I have a sort of Lutheran outlook theologically. I veer towards free church, as everybody knows. I'm a Congregationalist, not in the denominational sense, although who knows. People power, people power. Yeah, I mean, I like what they say about grace some of the times. I like what they say about sin some of the times. One of my biggest heroes is actually T.D. Jakes, the American black evangelist. I'd absolutely love to meet him. What a giant of a man. You know, he started in a shopfront church with 10 people. And now he's got possibly, arguably, the biggest mega church in America. I hear on the grapevine that the last problem Bishop Jakes had was 5,000 seats at the back of one of his auditoriums. I bloody wish I had that problem as well. And were they all hearing? Could they all hear him? With a man that can naturally project, I think everyone can hear you, Bishop Jakes. You know, the friend of innumerable presidents. What an extraordinary man. So from very humble beginnings, where basically things shouldn't have worked in his direction at all, you know, and having relatives largely coming from Louisiana and being a black guy, yada yada yada, to end up, what was it, in the Forbes list of the 100 greatest influencers. That is really someone worth talking to and a true Christian. Therefore, if someone says, I believe in original sin, as he does, am I taking that simply on the authority of the church? No. Although at the back of my mind, I am aware that it's something the church claims authority to pronounce on. Although, of course, if that had ever worked, which it never has, there'd have been no Reformation. So it hasn't worked, let's face it. We're telling you, Martin. Oh, no, you're not. You know, that's never worked. We're telling you, John. No, 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 monsieur. You know, so no, what authority? Whose authority? I mean, the whole point of Christianity is you get people disagreeing about bloody everything, and that's good and that's healthy. You know, what worries me more nowadays is people speaking as prophets in the Pentecostal and evangelical movement with no credentials whatsoever. There was one guy speaking about Trump recently. I wish I could remember his name. And it wasn't what he was saying about Trump, but I'm keeping out of the whole Trump thing. I'm a mere Brit. I'm a mere European. I don't understand the ins and outs of it. But this guy had the effrontery to stand up on TV and say, I'm now speaking to you as a prophet. And by the way, Donald Trump is now battling, Jezebel. I thought, oh, for God's sake, man. Number one, I don't accept your authority as a prophet. Says who? Says you, or sit down and shut up. And why drag Jezebel into it? You know, so you know, that worries me, because that's unquestioning authority. But hey, look, there are bound to be Pentecostals who are already saying Yahoo sucks. We don't go along with that either. Yeah, I think the church, Christianity in its mainstream forms, again, this will probably shock everybody, gets far too much of a bad press. You know, it's almost the one thing you can't be. You can be next to anything, but apart from that, why? Why is that? You know, the whole attitude of live and let live, which of course is insincere in the majority of mouths nowadays, never actually surfaces with Christianity. A dear friend of mine in the Theosophical Society who has written a book, and all this had better remain hush hush until the book is out. You know, conversations with atheists, and they could shut it as well. You know, put up or shut up, mate. You know, soup kitchens. What have you done, bitching about nothing? Put up or shut up. So, yeah, I mean, apparently from his research, what atheists don't like is the Christian notion of God. Well, sod off then. Goodbye. You know, there we are. Yeah. So, yeah, I think mainstream Christianity, and we all know what's wrong with it. You know, I'm not suddenly, oh my God, I'm coming over as a Christian apologist. What a terrible thought. I meant to be one of the radicals. I meant to be one of the bad boys. Yeah, we all know what's wrong, and we all know that nothing's being done about it. That's the weird thing. And we all know that everybody's too busy making money to actually take any responsibility. But it doesn't mean the stream is incorrect, or it's just nothing being blown away by more advanced metaphysics, and it doesn't mean Augustine and the Church Fathers were all wrong. And were they right about everything patently? No. Were they wrong about everything? I'd venture to say no, they weren't. Every time I remember the first time I read Fatty or Aquinas. Right, Catholic gossip for you. Apparently, that guy that's haunting me forever, John. What's his name again? Catholic writer, completely slipped my mind. Everybody's accusing me of being the next incarnation, but I think that's because I've got some weight on me. I can't remember it. We'll come back in a minute. Apparently, he can't be made.
Don't worry, you're not.
No, not
I know who you mean. It's on the tip of my tongue.
Yeah, it's on the tip of my tongue. It's one of the
Paul Tillich.
No, not Paul Tillich. He converted to Catholicism. Very gifted writer. The Man Who Was Thursday.
I know who you mean.
Oh, yeah. They're constantly accusing me of being like him.
The most prolific author of the 20th century.
Yeah, a really clever guy.
Yeah.
And because I've got the same girth size, I assume that's why they're basically saying that to me. But he can't be made a saint because he's too fat. And you think, well, hang on, what about Aquinas? I mean, he was a big boy. What about him? I was told by a Catholic friend of mine recently, yes, but that was
Augustine. So was Augustine.
Yeah,
he could barely get through a doorway.
Well, you've had some big boys throwing their weight around in the past. Anyway, I'll finish on this bit. I remember reading Fatty Aquinas years ago, the Summa Contra Gentiles, and feeling genuinely like I'd learned something. Again, and he used to practice white magic, of course, which people want to play down nowadays. He learned from Albert the Great, Albertus Magnus, two of the greatest magicians of their period, both of whom addressed the University of Paris dressed as Arabs because they were grateful to that mystical stream, that magical stream. I think that's interesting. Everybody hated everybody in those days, so those things never happened, but that happened. Plus the fact that you realise that the angelic thoughts from the angelic doctor, floating upwards and upwards and upwards to try and make sense of something he knew could never be made sense of. But it was almost like sort of inducing the mystical experience, which of course he enjoyed at the end of his life. And it says the famous saying, all of it's like straw in the fire the minute you've had that mystical experience. So no, I mean, vive the church, vive the church. Where do I stand theologically? I suppose I'm some sort of Unitarian. Therefore, oh God, here we go. So I do accept there's a Trinity in creation as we know it as a given from Genesis, but I do not accept, along with the oneness Pentecostals, that it's eternal because God is one. Yardy, 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 yard. And I like the sort of free church. Let's all have a chin wag and go along as we can. So that's my view. Back to you, John.
So you're basically a member of the Ecclesia Good-Natured Social Club. Yeah, sure, why not? But that being said, to be able to try and understand on a deeper level what I was trying to say, however clumsily, as I'm merely the court jester. Agatha's asking a question. Who was Steiner's previous incarnation? Well, that's a fascinating question. Speaking of Thomas Aquinas, we have to get to Thomas Aquinas. All of us, we do it on a daily basis, by the way. Just so you know, people are not of the tendency to understand that the whole process of thinking in which they live is footnotes to Aquinas, basically. Yeah, G.K. Chesterton. Yeah, thank you, Lowell. Yes, G.K. Chesterton. Good old George Chesterton. He was that Catholic you're trying to think of. The most prolific author of the 20th century, it is believed. Yeah, he's wonderful. What a writer. I mean, fluid. But wait, we're getting off the track here. It's so easy to do. See it as how our goal is to get off the track. But that being said, in understanding where I'm going with this, or I think I'm going, I'm not even sure at times. But it is Halloween. And so in light of that, you have to get beneath the fundamentals here. And that's the real key, is if you go to Rudolf Steiner and you look into what he has to say about monarchyism, he addresses it in a series of lectures that he did quite early. And they were lectures dealing with Freemasonry and all of those types of the Cain mystery stream, and which obviously the story of Cain and Abel is really kind of the genesis, the biblical, as far as the Bible's concerned, of the whole drama of good and evil and Cain and Abel, and the whole idea of fratricide and what does that mean? It's like this guy's on this in this other group, and therefore there has to be a problem because you're not in the same group as this other guy, but it's all based on birth, because see, Cain was born under certain circumstances that's different from Abel, and so that's what we're still struggling with at this time, and unless you get to a worldview that is able to try and embrace the totality. If you're just like, well, I'm on this team, okay, fine, you're on that team, but keep in mind the reason you're on that team is because that's where you were born. How profound is that? And how much did you have to do with it? Is it something that you actually put together? Have you looked at the other ways of framing the world and examined to see whether they might have value or not? And so it becomes that kind of a challenge. And as most people know, my restless spirit, I created a database of 50,000 volumes on ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia, and ran the largest occult bookstore in the world. So I've looked high and low to try and find some kind of cohesiveness, something universally human. And of course, that journey began with the name of Rudolf Steiner, and it's ultimately has found its culmination as that's my central way of deciphering this riddle that we're flowing through. And so to bring in Rudolf Steiner's concepts a little bit further, he says that the way one can understand Mane in the right way, because in most modern writers, you see they use a Manichaean or Manichaean, as you like to call them. That it's like an insult if you call somebody a Manichaean. You know, they're saying, "Oh, you're just a dualist." You know, it's like, well, so was Lao Tzu. He's pretty smart, but it's not really a dualism. It's because there's this whole idea of light and dark. One could be labeled a dualist, but it's so much more complex than that. And I think probably one of the most developed examples of a Manichaean type soul is Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, who actually his major work is Faust, and it was Augustine's work Contra Faustus, to where, because Augustine was a Manichaean. He was of that school, and he was converted to the Catholic stream. And so it's his work against Manichaeism that most of the thinking about Manichaeism has been based from time immemorial. But due to findings over the last 100 years or so, there's been a great deal of revision because a lot of works have been discovered and more. And there's still Manichaean groups on this planet. They weren't all eliminated. They were eliminated from the conversation, so to speak, in around the 12th century and into the 13th century, so that most people don't even know what it is. But that being said, in getting into this and saying, well, the Knights Templar were of that stream, but then you see that the Albigensian Crusade involved certain Knights Templars also. So you can't just take a group and say, oh, they're this or they're that, because there's going to be factions within groups that are serving one particular thing or another. And that's where the challenge comes in, because people like to be able to put labels on things and say, oh, he's one of those, and then they just dismiss it because they don't have to think anymore, because that person belonged to the wrong club and therefore they're one of these guys. And it's easy to do that. And because that whole idea of demonizing groups, I keep making reference to the Federalist Papers, the 10th Federalist paper by James Madison, where he says we created a system, and I'm just paraphrasing because I don't have it in front of me, but he said we've created a system of government where we've been able to, through checks and balance, work out most issues. But the one thing that we couldn't solve was factions, right? And that's, what does that mean? Well, in modern parlance, that's political parties, that's non-government organizations or NGOs, that's cartels, that's international banking, cabals, secret dark brotherhoods, whatever you want. There's all these various groupings, these egregores, these group think organizations, and not all of their members firmly adhere to what they're about either, so you can't just use a blanket dismissal over all of them. And so what are you left with? You're left with yourself. And so what can you do? You can come to an understanding. And the whole point of Rudolf Steiner's approach to understanding the spiritual world and its relation to the physical world, he called spiritual science, and he also called it anthroposophy, or the wisdom of being human. And he said that he didn't want people just to take what he said on authority. He said all he required of people was a suspension of disbelief, a healthy suspension of disbelief, and just investigate his work and see if it solves any of the riddles that you're living with. And so that's kind of the way you look at it. So if you're looking for a definition, it's not a good place to look, because Rudolf Steiner he's not inclined to define things. He's inclined to approach them from many different angles, because that's the way life is. And so David might take a photograph of a tree, and I could paint a watercolor of it. It's the same tree, but it definitely looks different. And so that's the dilemma that we live in. And so what we have to do is get back to fundamentals. And when you look at from a fundamental level, Rudolf Steiner says that to understand the thinking of Manichaeism, and it, by the way, harmonizes perfectly with spiritual science, is the idea that form arises from life, and that it's that life that brings one into creating forms. And so he gives the example how the Roman Empire, it went through the phases of being a republic and then finally being an empire with the emperor and all of that. But the Roman Empire passed away. But that form was taken up by the Catholic Church, and in the Catholic Church, they're even based in Rome, and instead of having all your various offices, such as in the Roman Empire. They gave them all new names, and now they're presbyters and bishops and archbishops, and cardinals, and all of that, which, because it's in keeping with the ninefold hierarchy scheme of Dionysius the Areopagite, has some measure of eternity in it. It is that there is something to that nonetheless, but that it's an old form, and that now it's being taken to its extreme, and you look at the whole idea, and he gives the example of that taking St. Augustine to its extreme, you end up with Jesuitism, right? And then on the other balance is monarchism. That's overcoming evil through mildness. Mane said that in order to overcome the darkness, you had to penetrate it with light. Well, that's really what we're looking at here, because again, if you go back to scripture, because mind you, Mane and his followers believe themselves to be Christians, but yet you see that there's Buddhist scriptures, and it includes Buddhism, it includes Zoroaster, it includes these other world teachers, so to speak. But the central role is that of Christ. And what did Christ do? He went around healing people and casting out spirits. Okay, he didn't kill any spirits. I don't recall him ever killing any spirits, by the way. He cast them out. He put them back where they belong. And see, that's how you overcome evil. You like when, for example, you have Saint Peter, when he's the first one to refer to Jesus as the Christ after the baptism, whereby the magical event happened in which the dove descended and the solar logos took up residence in the physical, etheric, and astral form of Jesus of Nazareth, and for 3 and some years dwelled within there and fully entered into the human realm, so that he could create a template, or the archetypal event that it has to do with being a seed for the future. So he cast his life into the world of form, and out of this life evolved the form of the resurrection, so that's the most dynamic example of what we're talking about here. Because as these forms move along, just as you watch a plant will grow, and it goes through definite stages. David, I know you're not a big fan of numbering systems, but you can literally count the stages of a plant and its growth, where you have the seed, and then you have the little sprout, and then that goes into a stem, and then there's branches, leaves, and then the flower, and then seed again. And you could count those, and you could say that in a sense is an apocalyptic scheme, just as is all of nature. And that it goes beyond that, though, because the word plant is related to the word planetos, which the planets. And I remember somewhere in here I have a book that explains the planetary orbits and the shapes that are created between the interaction of the various orbital planets and their relationship to the mathematical ratios of distribution of branches and leaves on plants. So that plants are images of planetary movement. And that was something that was referred to by Paracelsus von Hohenheim, who is considered the father of modern medicine. But he was also a great alchemist and just an overall interesting character. And to be bombastic comes from him, because Theophrastus Bombastus von Hohenheim. But he went on the stage of the medical school in London, and he took a lot of the books that were there and he made a big pile and he set them on fire. So that's kind of interesting in and of itself. So that he was into experimental science, and to be able to, he would go around and he would talk to midwives, he would talk to anybody, herbalists, just people, and he traveled all over Europe and in Western Asia, and gleaned everything he could. Plus, it also helped that he had clairvoyant abilities, and so he worked with something called the signature of all things, and that has to do with that planetary gesture that's represented in the realm of plants, and is extrapolated in another manner in Jakob Böhme's book, The Signature of All Things, which is a very dense reading, but it's that basic concept. And so form arises from life, but form doesn't necessarily go away. And that's the rub, is that as mankind evolves through the stages of consciousness, these forms are created and they become crystallized, and then they don't have a way of addressing the challenges of the next epoch. And so that's these great transitions that you see that are dealt with in various ways. You have Oswald Spengler deals with them, for example. He has his way of looking at that. Then there's also Carol Quigley wrote a book on the evolution of culture, and so people are frequently trying to address this, but there's no more comprehensive way of approaching it than Rudolf Steiner's work. Of course, there's 6,700 plus lectures and over 50 published books, so that's plenty of time to be able to tell your story. But that being said, so the more we can understand that what's needed at this particular stage is people to have the life in them to create the seed for the future forms, because we're not there yet. And it's not a time for the Manichaean mysteries to unfold as of yet. And Christianity is only in its beginning stages. It hasn't even arrived as far as the way it's viewed from the esoteric Christian perspective. And so we have to keep that in mind and be humble, but keep within your heart that idea of overcoming evil through mildness.
You've said so much, I don't know where to begin with that. Why does nobody ever ask me about my previous incarnations? Like every other gay man of worth in Britain, I was Elizabeth I. Do I think you're court jester? No, I never have done. I never will do. I do think the mystery of evil is being massively underplayed across our culture at the minute. I can't remember the name of the African warlord offhand. He's alive and kicking at the minute. He has literally hundreds of children as his soldiers. The first thing he does when he enters a village is have the children kill both of their parents and swear allegiance to him forever. That is what I call evil. It's not an abstraction. It's not something that can be just swept away. It's not something that yields too easily to analysis or secular, even mystical views of what that is. I think evil is a reality. I don't think, I've said on this show before, there are certain warlords in Latin America that rape women with Alsatians. And the litany could go on and on. These aren't trivial things. They're happening in this world around us. And it's very nice in comfortable Europe or comfortable America or comfortable Europe to just either turn a blind eye to it all or remain oblivious to it all. But they're human beings too, and that's what we're like underneath. Original sin is a reality. There is something wrong. There's a crack in the human condition. and it lets these things through. I don't think that's something, is it having a row with your neighbour over a dropped scone? No, it's not. No, it's not. It's nothing. That's nothing. Is it falling out with your confreres and colleagues? No, that's nothing. It's nothing. If you behave badly about it, that probably too is nothing. When there are monsters, actual real life monsters, since this is Halloween, I put the lamp over the. I couldn't move the lamp anywhere else, by the way. I notice it's giving me a Halloween look, which I'm very, very proud of. I think it's making me look slightly like Vincent Price at the minute, but that wasn't the intention. It's just I can't find anywhere else to put the lamp. No, I think the real depths of evil is something the modern world simply doesn't want to discuss. There was a movie, oh God, a couple of years ago with one of the big Hollywood greats, filmed in black and white, and it was well after Technicolor had been introduced. I can't remember the guy offhand. And a line that comes from it, I mean, this is a man that wills himself, the central character, to do bad things. What is it Edgar Allan Poe says? Until we understand the imp of the perverse, we will know nothing about good or evil. And I think that is a very profound comment. Some people wish to do what is bad in the full knowledge that it is bad. And, in my beloved Central Asia, I mean, they're all dying out now. What I actually think is happening is they're taking new forms. There are gangs, there are societies of bad people, and they're very proud that they're bad people. These are not trivial examples of things merely misunderstood. I mean, I like Evil is Good Misunderstood, Alexander Pope. I think that's a wonderful line. And I know there's a truth there somewhere deep down, but it doesn't allow me to forget young children being forced to kill their parents to become endlessly traumatized soldiers for this monster who the UN is trying to buy off at the minute. I'll get his name for next week. They know they can't really deal with him, but there's no political mileage in dealing with him anyway. So they're attempting to buy him off at the minute, from what I've heard. No, I mean, there are terrible things that happen around us in this world. The dark is dark. The dark is nightmarish. It's not in the service of light. And if it was, then maybe it's our understanding that's wrong. And there are real moral choices based on those observations. There are real moral choices. Do we choose to become people devoted to the mysteries of light or not? I mean, that's the whole genesis, literally. I'll give way.
Yes, I don't mean to grin in the face of all of that. I'm just in a good mood today. And so, but yeah, well, when you look at things like that, what does it say to me? It says that basically the UN likes anybody who's actively trying to reduce the population. That's what it says to me. And I think somebody would be hard pressed to argue that point, given their current stance on a great many issues. I was just watching before the show came on, and I carved my pumpkin, and I did a whole bunch of stuff today already, so it's I'm all ready for this Halloween. But I was listening to Cliff High, and it's nice because in the beginning of his podcast, he goes through all the military engagements of the last 100 years and just explains things that are common knowledge, that they were all fake, that they were all started by false flags, and that things are not at all what you've been told. And that type of cultural milieu is the one in which we live. We're not being told what's really going on. And so you just have to try and find your space, your sphere of influence. And you're like a homeopathic treatment to this hospital planet through that measure of goodness that you can bring into it. Because there's soulless creatures out there that perfectly enjoy evil. I mean, all you have to do is remember Hillary Clinton video of her after she took out Gaddafi, we saw, he died, and she starts cackling like the Wicked Witch of the West. And so that's what we're up against. There are people, excuse me, look at Peter Strzok giving testimony. I mean, if that guy doesn't look like a character out of Tolkien who's working for Mordor, I don't know who does. And so these people are very serious about their dedication to whatever path of iniquity they've chosen. And so, yes, there are those things, but that's just viewed within the sphere of one lifetime. Well, it says, please don't insult the Wicked Witch. Yeah, that's true. But that's just viewed in the perspective of one lifetime, because many of these beings that we're confronted with, they're not actually truly human. And so they got nothing to lose. Or Rudolf Steiner says that type of individual will have to go through incarnations as a retarded individual to be able to develop heart forces, right? And so whatever it is, it's going to be challenging for them. And I like the saying of what was Michio Kushi, or no, it was George Osawa, the founder of the Macrobiotic Foundation. He said, one day even what's his name, Al Capone. He said, one day even Al Capone will have supreme judgment. And so there's that whole idea. But that being said, we're going through a period of division right now. And according to esoteric Christianity, as we move toward the sixth period, the sixth root race, essentially, that's quite far in the future, but it will come to the point to where those that take up evil as the guiding impulse will more and more take on the caricature of evil. They will look like they're evil. You won't have any confusion as to who has evil intentions in that far in the future. But in the meantime, there's that developing where you get individuals that are presages of that, like Peter Strzok. The guy's evil. I mean, if you can't figure out that guy's evil, you're not paying attention. And so, that being said, it's okay, and not that they always do bad things. Because I remember one of the chiropractors that was a student of my friend George Goodhart, who started kinesiology. His father was a trombone player with Gene Krupa, but it was a summer, and we have all these resort towns up northern Michigan, and many of the rich people would come there from Detroit, which was kind of the Paris of the Midwest, was the auto industry, and all of that was centered here. And then there was Chicago, and that was all the meat packing and all that, and also the crime organization that's still there. That's, Valerie Jarrett and that whole crowd. But anyways, as you get into the music scene at the time, there was a lot going up north, and my friend, the doctor's father, was up north. He was 17 years old, and he brought his trombone, and he sat in with the Gene Krupa band, and they hired him on the spot. And so he joined the Gene Krupa band when he was 17 years old, which is you got to be really good to play in Gene Krupa's band. Gene Krupa played at my high school, by the way. Anyways, I'm getting too far off the trail. But he went up and he did his set. He did such a good job. He came off the stage and he's walking, and this guy goes, "Hey, kid." And he walks over, and the guy gives him $500. Okay, which I don't know if you know, but at that time, you could buy a car for $500, a new one, right? And it was Al Capone. He said, "Hey, kid, good job. Here." Gave him $500. So they're capable of doing some good things from time to time. But that being said, I have a lot of stories in that direction, but I'm not going to go there today. But that'll be fun at some future episode, because there's a lot of history in this area that is dealing with the various shades of whether one considers things to be on the up and up or not. And I guess I'm just alluding to too much at this point. But that being said, can you imagine being brought into the Gene Krupa jazz band at age 17 to play trombone?
Right, I think the African warlord was something Coney. Coney, what was that name again? Joseph Coney? Anyway, I know what your previous incarnation was. You were Pretty Boy Floyd, and one of the names at the top of Elliot Ness's list. I'm hoping I was Legs Diamond, but that's a different question altogether. Big in the jewelry industry, I remember a dear friend of mine, Cyrus Yabner. So my accusations of anti-Semitism, in my case, never went down too well, because I know so many bloody Jews as close friends. My dear friend Cyrus Yabner was an amazing film director, Hollywood director. I mean, he did movies like, what was that thing? Town and Country. He did Town and Country, and he did the original, the Return or something. I can't remember. I mean, he got very, very, very famous because he did Supernatural, and he also did, what was it? That thing with 24 Hours. That bloody man who I can't stand him, who keeps telling us he's a serious actor. Not Keanu Reeves. What's that? Sutherland, not Keeper Sutherland. Darling, you're not an actor. You're not an actor. Live with it. Pulling faces at a camera isn't acting, right? So, I mean, that's how Cyrus got very, very big. What's the connection there? Apparently, when he was a young cub on the way up in Hollywood circles, you used to get invited down. It was some sort of initiatic. I was never quite certain in what sense he was using that initiatic experience, to be invited to Vegas and meet the boys. And it was when he was on the way up, Cyrus, my dear friend, as a filmmaker, as a producer, director, people in Vegas were already being thrown out of 10-story buildings. So he decided he didn't want to go down that route. So, yeah, I mean, monsters with a romantic touch. Then what was it? The St. Valentine's Day Massacre. We didn't name it St. Valentine's Hall after the St. Valentine's Massacre. We named it after St. Valentine, who is one of my favourite people, and Valentinus, but that's a different issue. Yeah, oh gosh. I think it's a mistake to assume. I mean, I know that's a big thing in America at the moment. You know, Christian origins, what are they? And some people seem to feel that just Christianity dropped out the sky and everybody else is wrong and they know it. With respect to my American cousins, my American sisters and brothers, I mean, basically none of the rest of us think that. And, you know, there are very clear pagan precursors. Christianity is a mixture of all sorts of intercultural elements, attributes. That doesn't nullify it. If anything, that proves the point. You know, and I don't really think one can appreciate the beauties of the creation myths. And I use myth rather with a capital M as opposed to a lowercase m, because you're looking at stories that somehow speak truths which cannot be spoken about. And without knowing something of the Babylonian material, without knowing something of the Canaanite material, you know, the real richness of what's going on there tends to be very easily forgotten. And the fact that King Jesus, as he was called in the very early days, you know, is responding to that. He's not denying it, he's responding to it. So I think it's unwise to think every Christian assumes that it just sort of passes into the world willy-nilly and everybody else is wrong. You know, I mean, I admire some of the big preachers, as I've said, you know, Chuck Missler, I never got to know him. There were a couple of opportunities when that might have been possible, never actually materialized. And he's very subtle. I mean, he takes the Bible as a fundamentalist, but even, you know, he's such a bright guy that you actually end up wondering what he means by that. Personally, I'm not a fundamentalist, although I accept, you know, because I accept this medley of intercultural activity, which still ends up with the zenith, with giving the zenith of all revelations. More than that, I don't want to say at the minute because then we derail the show and it goes in a completely different direction. All I will say is that if we're really talking about an inspired text, lots of people use that phrase, those words, that phrase. Surely we'd have to exhaust all of the sciences, all of the arts, all of the humanities, all of the philosophies, and every single textbook on history before we could actually begin to approach what something like an inspired text might actually mean. That there is something more than human involved in the composition of that text. I mean, that is an extraordinary claim. It's an extraordinary way of looking at sacred scripture. And then, of course, the other question would naturally have to arise. Is that the only inspired text? And then you look at different levels of inspiration, yada, 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 which is why I don't want to get into that today. But I think it's worth bearing in mind certain church groups basically approach inspired text as we're right and you're wrong. So that's the sort of schoolyard attitude to it all. How do we know we write because we know? You know, no, come off it. And that is the attitude, sadly, of far too many born-again Christians nowadays, and it doesn't wash. I mean, and is that the attitude of our good Lord in Scripture? Actually, no, it's not. You know, never speaking to any, never debating with anybody. Our good Lord went into the marketplace and engaged with people. And, you know, I noticed they're trying to sanitize that as well. He was just going down there to be a bit of a pain in the arse. No. He was going down there because he was the savior. He was engaging with people as part of the redemptive act of salvation. That's what was happening. So, you know, I think there are all sorts of ways that we're somehow not grasping the immense depth of Holy Scripture. Baddies, I mean, you've got me thinking about baddies now. I had the singular pleasure, if that's the phrase I'm looking for, showing my partner Left Behind. Did that come up last week? Which was a Bible Belt sensation a couple of years ago, where you have, oh God, no, I've got to keep a straight face when I'm saying this, I'm sorry. The Antichrist is Nikolai Carpathia, or Carpathian, because you had to get East Europe into it somewhere. If you were from the Bible Belt, the swines. And, you know, you've got this incredibly good-looking Canadian actor also pulling faces at the camera to show what a bastard he is. And, you know, the rapture, oh, Lord. Actually, I do think the rapture is mentioned in the Bible. I mean, I know lots of people coming from my background do not. They don't think it's there at all. But, you know, you could, I think it's quite conceivable that the harpazo is argued there indirectly in a number of places. But, you know, but what does it mean? Certainly in this movie, you know, people are on a plane and there's some old biddy that draws the attention of a stewardess or somebody, you know, that her husband's missing and he must be naked because his suit is still on the seat by the side of her. So he's disappeared into divine glory along with everybody else that actually was a good guy. No. And yeah, worth looking at, by the way. I was on a zillion episodes, I seem to remember, but worth looking at as a cultural relic of its particular time. And the fact that Christianity, like everything else, can go wrong. The point is, when does it go right? And what does it mean when it is going right? Because I would suggest you're looking at something that stretches way beyond the iniquity of sin into something genuinely salvific, something offering personal salvation by a living Redeemer. That is such an outrageous thought. It's barely discussable. And it links in directly with gangsters. You know, why would people, I don't think most of the gangsters you mentioned, and I'm aware of the incredibly burgeoning legend that's surrounding Michigan. Why is it everyone I know in America is from Michigan or New Jersey? I've got to try and come to some sort of sense of that. I mean, I know they're all rebels to a man and woman, but why those two areas? Why isn't it stretched out? But everyone I know comes from either one area or the other. The gangsters in question, you've got to start getting sociological and modern. Was it deprivation? Was it psychological? Was it economic? There's a line going around one of the musicals in London at the moment. You have to get mobbed up or get into music to escape poverty in certain parts of America in those days. I suspect that's true. So you're not actually looking at the imp of the perverse. You're looking at survival. You're looking at the necessity of people wanting to continue their lives in extreme conditions and oppressive circumstance. I think you have to go to the step beyond that, like the monster I just mentioned, to think, well, no, he's not struggling. He's not struggling to keep, body and soul together. He's not struggling to pay the rent at the end of the month. He's not struggling to make something of himself when the whole surrounding prevailing culture is trying to oppose that. This is someone who has chosen a dark path. Therefore, I don't know. I think Eliot Ness, I used to love the version, the black and white one with Robert Stack. Why can't they come back? That was wonderful. Not these awful Kevin Costner epic movies. I know I can't stand Kevin Costner. I'm sorry. Write to him. I don't care. Tell him what I think. In it, Kevin Costner in his role as Eliot Ness. I mean, God's sake, man. If you're in the country of Shakespeare, that doesn't cut any ice. I'm sorry. But no, it's good to have comedy baddies. It's good to have pantomime villains, provided we remember that there's a reality behind them which stretches directly into the religious mystery itself. And at that point, we need all the resources we can get, Steinerian, theosophical, and everything else to help lighten our path, because it can get pretty dark out there. Handing back to you, John. Yes, I did have a piece of chocolate while you were talking, because my partner handed me some butterscotch chocolate, and it was too good to say no. I'm sorry. Handing back.
Quite a segue. Well, yeah, you start talking about the wise guys, the underworld underpinnings of Detroit and Chicago. Well, I have to admit, I mean, my best friend in kindergarten was from one of the families, Mafia families. I guess I shouldn't mention his name, but yeah. Well, a few years back, I had dinner with the grandson and great grandson of Big Jim Colosimo, who is Al Capone's boss. But I spoke with him. I said, well, I mean, at that time, that was it was looked upon more as like a organization that was helping protect Italian nationals. It's what it was in America. Every little ethnic group had their own so-called syndicate. I mean, like if you go into Hell's Kitchen out on the East Coast, that's like the Irish nesting place. So there's all those kinds of things, and you go, what measure does circumstance bring one to a measure of evil? I mean, I saw a movie last night about this guy who was blackmailed into being a spy in a tech company, and to protect his dad, who was of ill health and strapped with medical bills. There's going to be all manner of circumstances that one can have to justify all of that. And then you get into all the arguments amongst all the various viewpoints. I mean, as far as critique on Christianity, I hear all the things that contemporaries say, but they pale in comparison to the arguments of the Emperor Julian against the Christians that was translated by Thomas Taylor in 1809, and this was reprinted in a limited edition of 500 sets and slipcases. that was subsequently, most of it was burned because it pissed people off. And but they were discovered in a musty old basement in New York, and they called up my friend Donald Weiser from Weiser's Bookstore, and he came by and opened the case, and there was the arguments of the Emperor Julian against the Christians, and the orations of Emperor Julian to the sovereign son, and which actually Rudolf Steiner says can be viewed as very significant within the history of Christian understanding, because actually it was Julian who wasn't comfortable with Constantine. You remember, he was the successor of the line of Constantine, and Constantine was the first Christian emperor. And Julian wasn't convinced of the sincerity of the conviction of it. He found the initiates that he encountered in his adventures in traveling to find wisdom with the philosophers and becoming initiated himself, but ended up apparently being killed because in his writings he revealed some of the secrets that were revealed to him in his initiation. So I guess he should have kept his mouth shut. So there's all those things that what do they say? Loose lips sink ships, so to speak. But that, yeah, I got lots of stories about wise guys and all that stuff. Yeah, because I'm from this area. I mean, geez, all you got to do is look at Hillary Clinton, her dad. Okay, Hugh Rodham. Well, that Rodham isn't his last name. That's a name he created. He was actually. It's a Central European name. I'll just leave it at that. But he was actually Jewish, by the way, and at least half Jewish. I'm not sure how much, and converted. I don't know. It's confused. I haven't looked at those files in a long, long time. But him and one other guy were the successors to Al Capone. So that's the lineage that she hails from. And I know that because that's what Bill Clinton passed on to his personal bodyguard. And so, that's the kind of world in which we live. I mean, geez, if you go back, you're not going to find a complete source of goodness unless you approach Jesus Christ that I can think of. I mean, just look at King David. I mean, one of his lines of descent is from incest. I mean, that's not right. I mean, and it's in his lineage, and so anywhere you look, you're going to find the husks, as they're referred to in the Kabbalah, the shells, and then, but concealed within the shell, there's still light that needs to be released from that unconscious darkness, and so it's through consciousness that we redeem these experiences of time and eternity. I mean, I'm very much of the conviction, and I say don't do this at home, but I've had guns pulled on me, and it was because I was so nonchalant about the way I reacted to it. I wasn't intimidated. It's like whatever, smile as if somebody was handing me a cupcake, and it's very disarming to them, and in fact scared them off, and so these forces of evil are actually not very strong, and Christ overcame evil not through fighting it. He overcame the evil through his superabundance of love, and that was how he healed, and that was how he drove out demons, because he was truth. And how can falsehood stand in the way of truth? And that being said, perhaps it's a good time to remind people that we have an astute author in our presence here, Reverend William Parry, and he has 3 books. His first book is The Grammar of Witchcraft, and it's a Shakespearean study. And no, you won't get any how-to spells, his book of Shakespearean as poetry, Caliban's Redemption, and his primary work, Mount Athos Inside Me, Essays on Religion, Swedenborg and the Arts, edited by the very talented Daniela Irndust. And we used to talk quite frequently about Swedenborg in the company of Johann Wolfgang von Goethe and John Stuart Mill, being as that they were the three individuals that were selected by the research project at Harvard University that invented the IQ test. And they came to the conclusion that the three highest IQs they found were those three individuals. And that's Emanuel Swedenborg, John Stuart Mill, and Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. So that I always like to use that in face of materialists who try to convince me that I'm dealing with poppycock. Is that why is it that 2 out of 3 of those people are occultists? And the jury's not in yet on John Stuart Mill. He's so widely read, he was probably quite proficient in that area of study also. So that being said, let's give due respect to the unseen. Just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's not there.
That one caught me. Yeah, I mean, we can talk about Swedenborg more if you want to. Certainly, that was.
Actually, I didn't even finish my little plug for you.
Oh, right. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And his books are available on Amazon. And so it'd be a smart move on your part to avail yourself of them because he's such a good writer. And I just admire somebody who has a gift to put words together in a way that it's just a pleasure to read. And G.K. Chesterton was one of them. I mean, his writing is so smooth. It's like, when you get to people like him or William Butler Yeats or some of these people, I mean, James Joyce, he's a bit jarring, but it was challenging for people at the time. But there's some people, Lord Dunsany, Tolkien, you can go down the whole list of inklings. They're all such gifted with the language, and I agree with David here. We know this, that art is higher than philosophy, and science is right in there. You can't leave out that because that has to do with being aware of something. That's what science means, to be aware of. But that being said, I also have 2 books. I almost forgot to give myself a plug here. The Arcana of the Grail Angel, The Spiritual Science of the Holy Blood and of the Holy Grail. And that has 640 pages and extensive bibliography and diagrams giving you an overview. This is my old worn copy, complete with watermarks stained on the back. And my second volume is Arcana of Light on the Path. And this is more of a meditative tool with a foreword by the noted astronomer William Bento. The first work is a study developed out of the work of Rudolf Steiner of the underground streams of esoteric Christianity, which flowed from the Brotherhood of the Holy Grail to the Knights Templar and the true Rosicrucian order. And so in understanding that particular perspective on the Christian stream, that's more of an underground stream, but has come to the surface, especially since 1899 with the ending of the Lesser Kali Yuga. We now are in a phase to where we can begin to unfold our inner relationship to these things more profoundly. And that was the point at which I took the diagrams of Eric Pfeiffer that crossed my desk many years ago and endeavored to put into a schemata based upon the Western tradition to help approach these types of mysteries. And my books are available on eBay from me directly. If you're outside the country, you have to get a hold of me through either my academia website, which is linked below, or on private message on Facebook. And we can make arrangements for you to get the books through another way, through PayPal. And if you want to buy us cups of coffee, for Reverend David, it's paypal.me/dparry777. And for myself, it's paypal.me/John Barnwell 888. There, I got it all in, I think. Okay. And of course, I want to thank our specific sponsors here, Tyla and Vadim, that their continuing support has made this venture possible. And a lot of other people have helped along, well, quite a few other people have helped along the way. And it's all greatly appreciated. And but that being said, we still have about 9 minutes or so. And usually at this point, Reverend David has something to say. And that's a good thing. Mount Athos is amazing. I've been there. Yes, it is. I haven't been there, but I have seen some wonderful pictures. Reverend David has been there, though. And so it is inside him.
You call me with that one. Yeah, but it's about the cultural influence Mount Athos has had on the arts more than a travelogue. Everybody was writing about having been there, and a dear friend of mine, the artist Haralampi Giorostikov, recently went there. But I was trying not to do that. I mean, it grew out of a series of 3 international conferences I was invited to, so that's how the book arose. I wasn't intending to write about Mount Athos. It just sort of happened. And I'm pleased I did, because it's a remarkable place full of people with genuinely experimental and depth spiritual attitudes. That's the bit that surprised me after talking to some of the monks. And if I wanted to say something controversial, I'd say Gnosticism is alive and kicking, and it's on Mount Athos, disguised as hesychastic prayer. But I'll say no more than that, unless I'm lynched, which I've no intention of being this evening. And why is that wrong? There's too many people, too many buzzwords nowadays with people. Oh my God, the Gnostic word, the G word, let's attack. Why not think about what's going on there and what it means and how people are using it differently and where it might be getting you? I mean, as I sort of started to say before, I don't mind talking about Swedenborg some more. I mean, for me, I suppose he's more of a meditational tool than, a theological stroke meditational tool than I don't see him really as a theoretician. I know lots of people do, and I know the New Church does, but I actually don't see him that way. I think it's much more helpful to lead a life of very active prayer. That's how I approach Swedenborg, and how I continue to approach Swedenborg. I mean, without him, I don't think I'd have made what tiny progress I've made in theology. Luther may be right about the big questions, but there are loads of other questions. And without Swedenborg, I don't think I'd have got to where I'm still arriving. I wouldn't say I've arrived, but I'm arriving. I mean, the other person I love talking about, or at least did before you and I got together, John, and before the days of the pew. I mean, I used to go on and on about Plotinus, because I don't really see sort of pagan Christian. You're looking at another of those binaries again, which is true, but it's not true. And the fact that the Enneads just blew me away. I mean, even in my most hippie days, they blew me away. And the legend is some crystallized truth, isn't it? Myth is grand story, grand narrative around the human condition, which is why myth must never ever be dismissed. But folklore, I mean, that has a sort of minor version of the mythic thing. Mircea Eliade is my guide in myth, and I think he's incredibly important. But as I say, folklore, there was a tale in folklore that when her last temple was, it always worries me to death when John pulls out his earplugs. I think that's dropping his responsibility and terrifying me when it's as a mere guest on this series of shows. What was it? You've got a duty of care, as they said to the king in the old days. So, folklore. When the last temple of the goddess Aphrodite was pulled down, it said she went to live with Plotinus. Little stories, little aspects of folklore that hold huge truths behind them. Personally, I hope I'm not the only individual that finds that a very pregnant story. And so he wanted to meet the gods, and he walked around Mount Olympus, and very non-trivial things are said. I noticed John is desperate to wave a text at me before I get prayerful.
Yeah, here's a. Let's see, I got to get it over here. There's me. And if you look in the corner there, let's see, it's hard to line it up here. See Plotinus there behind the flower pot. I brought my 1-volume McKenna translation of Plotinus. There's me back in the days when people looked like this. And I don't have enough hair to pull that off. But it's an article on restaurants in Ann Arbor in the April 1984 edition of Monthly Detroit, complete with Tiger Tom Monahan, back when he owned the Tigers. So Plotinus, I cut my teeth on Plotinus. I actually had the multi-volume set of Plotinus's translations in the original edition from the Medici Society. That went by the wayside. I've had numerous different versions. Plotinus kind of sums it up, and it's hard to avoid Plotinus. And actually, the school of Dionysius the Areopagite that I make frequent reference to, it's obvious the Neoplatonic roots of that particular school of thought. And it was the mission of St. Paul to bring Christianity to the Greeks, right? That it wasn't just another Jewish cult form, that it was universally human, and it was his mission to bring it into Greece and Rome that made it what it is today. And so that's quite an interesting in of itself, that to be able to convince Dionysius, the leader of the school at the Agora, the marketplace in Athens, and to be the head of the first esoteric school founded by Paul. That's something that's almost unknown to scholars, but yet Rudolf Steiner's time and time again makes a point that it's a real thing, and they call him Pseudo-Dionysius because it was one of his successors that finally wrote down what was originally an oral teaching. But that's that whole doctrine of the hierarchies, the 9 levels of hierarchies with angels, archangels, archai, and exousiae, dunamis, kuriotetes, thrones, cherubim, seraphim, that whole sequence of angelic hierarchies, the supersensible reality in which we live, and that whole supersensible reality is addressed in the Pater Noster, the Lord's Prayer. So perhaps we can get the Reverend Davis to lead us in the Lord's Prayer at this time.
Because you know me, I just have to say something quickly. I do think certain moderns are worth struggling with. I mean, I certainly value very, very highly Paul Tillich. And I really, one day, I hope you're going to send me a copy of that article, by the way. I'd love to read that. I really want to. Richard Rorty can shut up. Mr. Smug. There's something on YouTube, one of his lectures, where he's piling in allegedly to Paul Tillich and simply showing he doesn't know what Paul Tillich means by a thimble, which I thought was hilariously funny, unlike the followers of Broughty. I'm incredibly in debt theologically to Paul Tillich. So there is that too. And yeah, I'd really love to. We need a Plotinus chinwag at some point, because he's such this sort of mind-blowing guy. I think you're right. Let's finish with the Lord's Prayer today, because that seems appropriate. Of course, today's am I the only Christian that likes Halloween? Am I the only one? We carved a pumpkin. I love baked pumpkin. I love baked pumpkin. I love people in costumes. The trick and treat's an American thing, but I love the trick and treat thing. So, do you trick the kids, or give them a treat? Yeah, no, I love it all. Bit of fun. What's wrong with fun? And the real celebration, of course, this year in Britain is the 2nd of November, All Souls, where we remember our ancestors, so the Christian version of the same thing, but the glorious dead are remembered on the 2nd of November anyway. Please bow your heads and bow your hearts for one moment as we remember the words of our Lord and Saviour Christ Jesus. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
Amen. Well, thank you so much, my friend, and for everybody there that came here to share this Halloween Eve or afternoon with us, depending on where you are located. I want to thank you for showing up, and for those who catch the show later, hello and goodbye. I don't know why you say goodbye. I say hello.